Hello and welcome to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, with your favorite conservatarian, Jeff Charles. And I've got another fire conversation for you guys today. I've got a great guest, and we're going to talk about some things that I talk about a lot, but maybe sometimes you guys need to hear it from somebody else. But before I get into all that, you know what to do. Please like this video, share this video, and subscribe. Hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I upload a new interview, which I do every Wednesday and Friday evening at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard. Also, check out my audio podcast. It's the same name. You can get it on whatever podcast app that you use, A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. It'll come out. And lastly, if you haven't already, check out my new satire Substack at The Smattering. It's called The Smattering. Go on Substack and put in The Smattering. You'll see it. Or you can go to smatteringnews.substack.com, and that link will be in the show notes as well. If you like my breaking news on Twitter, you can get more of the full-length articles. I'm having a lot of fun. Just launched it. I would love to hear what you guys think about it. Now then, without further ado, I'm going to bring on my guest, Mr. Lee Spieckerman, political marketing and policy consultant. He's been involved with the GOPs for a long time. I have no idea how many decades, Lee, but you've been around for a while, and you've got a little bit more of a unique viewpoint as a conservative Republican. So I'm looking forward to speaking to you about these things. Welcome to the program.
Well, it's great to be with you, Jeff. And I would say I'm a conservative, though the way I define conservatism is, frankly, not the way a lot of Republicans do, especially too many of the office holders and the Republican-leaning pundits and a lot of the political class in Washington. I think too much of what's called conservative is basically a label. Things have been labeled conservative, frankly, to advance the agenda of the donor class, a lot of politicians. So, it's great if you're, excuse me, it's great if you're working trying to influence Republican politicians or Republican voters' opinions. If you can take some issue position and say this is conservative, then it's heresy to go against it. I'll give you one quick example, and that is our trade policies over the past 30 years have just been catastrophic for our country. But it became Republican dogma that we basically had to open the doors and allow countries like first Japan and then China and still even our friends in Germany to have unfettered access to our markets and basically preside over the deindustrialization of our country, which had a disproportionately horrific impact on Black Americans and inner cities. And, that's just, I could certainly go through others, but that to me is not a conservative position. Protecting our manufacturing base, making our workers the first priority. Not, much as I love investors and I admire good CEOs, but that should not be the main focus of policy. The main focus should be that huge number of workers in America and the American middle class. So to me, that's the essence of conservatism, just as our founding fathers placed most of their emphasis on small farmers and craftsmen and shopkeepers. They certainly didn't even have corporations as we know them. Country was founded. So that's, forgive the long dissertation on conservatism, but I start with that because, frankly, if you get called a conservative, a lot of people assume you've swallowed whole a lot of very distasteful and I would say un-American policy positions. And the other big one, which I know we'll get into, is on racial issues.
Yes.
Conservatism, the word conservative, and you're better equipped to address this than I am, but I know firsthand that for a lot of Black Americans, when they hear conservative, they hear racism. The two are coupled. And of course, unfortunately, too many white conservatives would say, oh, well, that's because Black people don't get it or they've been brainwashed. No, maybe it's because, frankly, the majority of white conservatives, certainly those that are in leadership positions and are opinion leaders, have been utterly clueless on racial issues, really don't get it, don't grasp what Black Americans deal with, and even fully grasp what they've dealt with throughout our history, because too much of that has been diluted. And so
well, actually, let's get into that. Let's get into that in a second. I don't want to give everything away up front, but because first I want to talk about you. Like, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and kind of how you came to be in this movement?
Well, I'm not sure what the movement is. I guess I'm trying to start a movement, to be honest with you.
Okay.
When I was on Fox News back in 2015, right as Donald Trump basically secured the Republican nomination, it was clear he was going to, win enough delegates to win the nomination. I said on Maria Bartiromo's show, I said conservatism is about pro-Americanism and all Americanism. And I think one of the biggest problems with the whole "Make America Great" idea, the MAGA idea, that has animated the Trump base and the Trump campaign, is it has a kind of a racist connotation. If you're not a white conservative, it doesn't seem, with obviously some exceptions, but I would say for the vast majority of Black people, it does not seem like it's something for you. And what I believe in is real Americanism, which is for all of us, and frankly, it goes beyond wanting to be nice and loving and all of that, which are great things to feel.
Sure.
But just for the strength of our country. I mean, China has 4 times our population, and we cannot afford to dispose of anybody. We cannot afford any large group of people to be below their potential, and making sure everybody can rise to their potential and everybody feels included in our system is, to me, the essence of conservatism, because again, that's pro-American. We cannot have millions of disproportionately Black and Hispanic kids in poverty, getting inferior educations, not being well prepared to compete and to add value and add wealth to our country. And frankly, white people still control every realm of our society. As many Black people as we've had elected to office and appointed to office and serving in government, which is a great thing, nobody would deny that still most of the levers of power are controlled by white people. So addressing this issue and making Black American advancement a priority, it's certainly something Black Americans can do much to advance, but frankly, they can't do it alone, not when white people still control most of the levers of power. So white people have to say, this is a national priority because we need it to make this country great. And I would change Trump's slogan from America First to Americans First, all Americans first. And I think that's the direction we need to go. So if I'm leading a movement, it's that. And what you just heard me say, which frankly, some of it is heresy or, critical race theory or wokeism. If you've read my Twitter, and that's at Spieckerman, Spieckerman, you'll see that I don't adopt conventional points of view, but I do think the common thread in all of the things I expound and all of the things I believe is pro-Americans, Americans first. And that doesn't require demonizing any group of people. It doesn't require saying that billionaires are evil. It doesn't require agreeing with Bernie Sanders on everything. What it does require is rationality, is common sense. And I've talked to a lot of voters in my political work. And it's really amazing, even very pro-Trump voters, when you get to talking to them, how often they say, people really need to work together more, and we really need to take this bitterness down. And Trump has gone too far. I mean, they prefer him to a Hillary Clinton,
sure,
or somebody on the left, perhaps. But they're not crazy about everything he's doing, and I think that's a big myth out there. Americans really do. It's not that we shouldn't disagree. It's not that everyone's going to be kumbaya all the time, but we really do have to put our country first and put Americans first. And just think rationally, what ideas that are considered conservative and what ideas, frankly, that are considered even leftist, is there merit? Is there a way to fuse some of those? And that's not being moderate. That is just being rational. This is if you're building a company or you're launching a new product. You may say, hey, there's some great features here, but this other team has some other features, and they may consume too much juice or too much power. So how do we, put them together to where they harmonize instead of making a kludge and or device that's cumbersome and doesn't work? That's kind of how I think we ought to approach things. And so that's the movement I'm leading, and that is Americans first, all Americans.
So you basically read my mind, because after your the first opening that you just did when talking about like trade and things like that, I was going to ask you, do you consider yourself to be America first? But you've already answered that question.
Americans.
I like that. I like Americans first. I mean, it sounds
all Americans.
Yeah, exactly.
To be on there. Unfortunately, I think that's actually necessary to say. Americans first, all
Americans. Yeah. Now, but when you're talking about free trade and the free market, you already know the pushback, and I'm not an expert on economic matters, so I'm open, I'm agnostic on a lot of this stuff. But I remember when Trump was in office, a lot of people were getting on him about putting those tariffs on and wanting to bring manufacturing back. And I think I even saw you make a comment that he didn't go far enough.
Exactly. If anything, he didn't go far enough. Now, I will say President Trump really did break the mold on trade and did completely upend the mindset on trade, certainly among many Republicans, and brought some Democrats who used to be the party that believed in protecting manufacturing and protecting American workers, kind of brought them into the fold. But frankly, we made some trade deals with China that I think were not aggressive enough. I don't think, I laid out on television that we needed a glide path to a zero goods trade deficit with China in some reasonable time frame, like 7 years, maybe 10 years, and we need to have benchmarks on each year that trade deficit is reduced. And if we don't hit that, there would automatically be enhanced import tariffs imposed on Chinese goods. That's the kind of aggressive strategy I think we needed. I think we were still too conventional in believing in these trade agreements, which China has never lived up to, which are utterly unenforceable. I mean, think how opaque the Chinese economy is. We don't even know when they're lying about their GDP and their other economic metrics. We have no way of doing due diligence on that. We don't know, obviously, what happened in Wuhan and how this coronavirus got started. They're certainly not opening the books on that. So the idea that we can make a trade deal with them and lay out a lot of complex requirements in that deal, and that somehow we're going to be able to get into China and board into their companies and their state-owned enterprises and state-backed enterprises and find out what they're doing and what they're paying their workers and things like that. It's ridiculous. A tariff is something that's as American as apple pie. We've had import tariffs since the founding of our country. There's something that Abraham Lincoln fervently believed in. Alexander Hamilton, one of our founding fathers, and George Washington firmly believed we had to have tariffs to build the American manufacturing base. And it makes perfect sense. Jeff, if you were doing business with a company, or a company wanted to do business with you, and they said that they'd sell you whatever products you were looking for really inexpensively, but you knew that company was nefarious, maybe even wanted to, down the line, destroy your company,
right?
Would you be buying goods from them and providing revenue to them to do that?
It's absolutely insane. Like, I mean, even with the limited knowledge that I have, I know that's crazy. Like,
well, but that's what we've been doing. We have been sowing the seeds of our own destruction. We did it. We destroyed the American steel industry by allowing Japan to dominate it, to dump steel into the United States. Thanks to my friend Dan D'Amico, who built Nucor Steel into a titan and really the largest steel company in the United States. We began to turn that around, but it took decades to do that. So it began with Japan. We lost our entire consumer electronics industry to Japan. And now we have 75%, I believe, of our advanced microchips being made in Taiwan, which is, on the doorstep of China, and obviously under threat and potentially under siege from that. Imagine if mainland China, if China succeeds in taking over, conquering Taiwan. Did I say Thailand? I meant Taiwan. If they manage to take over Taiwan,
which is very realistic.
yeah, if China manages to take over Taiwan, which, as I said, manufactures where about 75% of our advanced microchips are manufactured, including for our military equipment, advanced computers, national security technology. 75% of those chips come from Taiwan. Imagine if China were to succeed in conquering Taiwan, what that would mean for the United States. I mean, we think we have to worry about China now. What are we going to do? So we've got to get that chip manufacturing out of Taiwan and re-domesticate it. The Biden administration has made some important moves on that, at least moved in that direction, and encouraged and tried to seed more investment in American chip manufacturing. But frankly, it's not. It's too little and it's too slow. We've got to do a massive investment in American chip manufacturing. We've got to re-domesticate that production of that crucial bedrock of our entire technological ecosystem, and that is again pro-American. Everything is not free market. If all you believe in is free markets, then we would allow drug dealers to openly sell their product on the street. As some would say, we do allow that, but I mean even more boldly than they do it now, and even in more places. There are certain restrictions a country like America, like the United States, has to place on the free market. The free market is not everything. What does matter is Americans, and we Americans should be able to have as much freedom as possible. Sure. We should be able to express our uniqueness. We should be able to have a lot to say about who's in power and who's governing us. But the free market is only one manifestation of that. The other is voting and what our elected representatives do and policies they make. And another problem I have with conservatism is they talk about how wonderful our Constitution is. They venerate the Constitution, our founding fathers. We're a government of the people. But then they spend every night on cable news channels, and practically every speech conservative politicians make tears down the American government, acts like it's a terrible thing, like it's a catastrophe, it's a disaster. And of course, they blame the quote unquote the Democrats. But hey, you know what? There are a hell of a lot of Republicans in the government at the federal level, and even more at the state level. They dominate in terms of, or certainly predominate at the state level in terms of legislatures, and certainly have at least a balance among governors. So this idea that you need to, that everything having to do with government is terrible, and you've got to tear down the government and say it'll never represent the people, and we just need a free market. I think that's crazy talk, because we elected these people. And if conservatives think that the wrong ideas are being pushed by the government, if they think the government's too controlling, if they think the government's pursuing bad policies, I have an idea. Go out and get better people elected. And guess what that requires? Persuading people, people that don't trust you, like Black Americans, and many others, a lot of young people that don't trust you and would not listen to you, even if you made perfect sense, because they don't trust the source. How about finding a way to persuade them, and then maybe you can elect more people that will make this government better and not go around tearing it down all the time.
Yeah. So and I do want to get into that, but I did have one more question before we get into more of the racial issues, because I really want to have a conversation with you on that. And I was actually going to ask this to open up with, because it is October 28th, and Elon Musk officially owns Twitter today. So what's your take on that?
I think it's fantastic. I'm a huge fan of Elon Musk. Another trend, another thing that we have in this country is anybody that accomplishes great things, they basically have to be perfect. If they say anything out of line, if they make a mistake, let's tear them down. That means everything they do is evil and destructive. Elon Musk has just done a wonderful job building a great electric vehicle company, building an amazing space flight company, SpaceX. And he's not perfect. He makes mistakes. He's got an ego. He's got, he has bad days just like all of us do. But I really believe, you can read on Twitter, he tweeted a letter that he wrote to Twitter advertisers about what their goals are with the platform. And I think, and I believe I retweeted it at Speakerman, and it really does a wonderful job, an authentic job. It's not syrupy, it's not sugar coated. I think a very authentic, but a very idealistic uh, kind of mission statement for what he wants Twitter to be. And I don't. Again, is every decision he make going to be perfect? Absolutely not. But I believe I can't think of a person better equipped, with more passion, with more creative thinking, that could make that platform so much better than Elon Musk. And I think those that said he overpaid for it are, again, they're wearing blinders, or they're being very myopic, because that is the only media platform that is almost universally addressed and interacted with all, across the globe. There is no single platform. I mean, obviously there are video platforms, and there are television networks, and there are streaming services, but they do not have the ubiquity that Twitter does, and they certainly don't have the viewer or reader interactivity that Twitter does.
Right.
So I think the power of that platform, we're just scratching the surface, and I think Elon Musk understands that and sees that. So I'm very optimistic about it. I'm excited to see what Elon Musk does with Twitter. I think it will be great for the platform. I certainly don't think it's going to become more ideological. I think it will become less ideological. I think he'll bring former President Trump back onto the platform, and perhaps some other people that have been banned. But I don't, by any means, I'd be shocked if that platform became some kind of right-wing mouthpiece. I think it's going to be more objective than it is today. I think they're going to be more judicious about banning people. And it's a private company. I've never said that Twitter shouldn't have the right to ban people, but I think it's pretty bad, unless former President Trump is saying Heil Hitler, or pushing obviously dangerous or criminal activity blatantly. No former president should be banned from that platform. I want to hear what any former president says, whether I voted for him or not. They're pretty well connected. They've been in the room in a lot of meetings that I've never been in. I'd kind of like their perspective. I may think it's crazy. I may disagree with it, but I sure want to hear it. So the idea of banning a former president because you don't like his politics, or because he inflames some people, to me, that is completely antithetical to the whole idea behind Twitter, to what attracted people to it in the first place and built its user base. So I think Elon Musk gets that. And I'm sure there are people on the left that have been banned. They shouldn't be.
So what the people who are, because it seems like it's mostly people on the left who are afraid of this, or who are complaining about it. Like, well, what do you think is motivating that? Because I have my viewpoint on that, but I wanted to get your perspective. Well, what do you think is motivating
years, Well, since you've tossed me the hot potato first, I'll just say that maybe I'm being too charitable with this, but it really is how I feel. Our country has become so bifurcated. It has become so tribal. We have so much extremism and just drama on both sides about everything, that people, there's constant outrage and fear if anybody you disagree with gains more notoriety or influence or power. It's just it terrifies folks that don't completely align with them politically, or think that they're at all sympathetic to some political figure or some political idea or philosophy that they don't agree with. And obviously Elon Musk, he said good things about Trump, but he said he's started voting Republican, which he had not. So hey, if you're a Democrat or you're aligned with the Democrats, I can't blame him for being a little concerned about what he's going to do with it. But I think they should step back and look at this from 40,000 feet and say, what is this man's history? What is he actually saying? His plans are. What is his business track record? It's pretty damn good. And he didn't do that by alienating, a big chunk of his supporters. He did that by expanding his customer base and getting more people to love his products, like Tesla, not by pissing people off. So I just think they need to chill on that But again, I'm not saying I don't have some understanding for what the basis of it is, because he's certainly not a left wing figure.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
so and frankly, that's enough. If you see anyone who isn't clearly
On
defined
your
as on
team. Yeah.
the left, whatever the hell left even means anymore, but let's just stipulate whatever the left is. Again, if you see them gain notoriety, power, gain a new platform, people are terrified. So, and of course it happens. It's the same on the right. The fact that we have a lot of Democrat leaning and Democratic Party donating and Democratic uh, point of view sympathetic people that are in key positions in the media, the mass media, television, and the video realm in our country, and in obviously newspapers and the news websites. Certainly, far more people with a leftward skew in their opinion have positions of influence in those outlets than those on the right, and that we hear every day. People on the right decry that and lambaste what they see as obvious bias, and they're often correct about that.
Yep.
So my point is, I think both sides need to chill, and I think if anything, Elon Musk taking over Twitter will lead to more working across the aisle, more listening on each side. I hate extremism, but I think extreme opinions are essential. There's a
Yeah.
big difference.
Yeah.
An extreme opinion can be basically anything that is not right in the mainstream. I mean, even what I've said about trade over the years, I remember saying we ought to have a pretty high tariff on all manufactured goods. And the host, I believe, was on Fox Business, kind of, went like that. So he was literally shocked that I said it. And so I guess that was extreme, but we need to hear that. It doesn't mean we need to adopt it. And I'm not talking about, endorsing genocide or racism or talking about replacement theory. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just saying, wait a minute, let's come at this from a whole nother perspective. Let's look way outside the bounds of where we've been operating and see if there are maybe some solutions, or at least pieces of solutions that we can integrate. And again, that's what Elon Musk has always done as a business person. That's what every successful entrepreneur I've ever seen does. That's what I try to do. So why we don't take that approach to public policy and government is beyond me. We just do the dumbest things in the political realm, things that we would never think of doing in business or in our working lives, or even in volunteer work that we do, or interacting with people, things that we'd never find acceptable or we would think would be incredibly counterproductive or even destructive. And in any other realm of our life, we take as normal in the political world. That just doesn't make sense. Not for a government of the people, not for a country that's based on individual sovereignty and freedom and people working together in freedom to accomplish great things.
Sure, definitely, and that's kind of going to lead me into this conversation that I wanted to have with you. I mean, especially when it comes to messaging and when it comes to being able to express certain opinions, it seems like, on both sides, you have these political ghettos where you're only allowed to toe the party line, right? And, as much as we on the right say that we like diversity of opinions, it's not as true as they would have us believe, right? I mean, because you and I tend to line up on a lot of the racial issues, especially on the right. And I've been doing it for years, not as long as you have, but I've taken the arrows. And some of my followers will even say, if you're taking arrows from both sides, you're probably doing something right. But, in one of your videos, you said, when it comes to racial issues and the issues between whites and blacks and the history of this country and the issues that still exist, that a lot of white Americans just don't want to talk about these issues. And when I heard you say that, I was thinking, well, white progressives love talking about it, but the way they talk about it isn't in a way that's helpful. It's more demeaning, condescending, paternal. But what you said, I think, is very accurate about white conservatives, even black conservatives to a certain extent, depending on who you're talking to. They avoid these issues like the plague, to the point to where I know that on the left, they exaggerate racism. They make it sound like there's a Ku Klux Klan member behind every tree waiting to lynch me as soon as I walk by, right? But then on the right, they're like, there is no racism except for in the KKK, neo-Nazis, and the Democratic Party, but nowhere else does racism exist. Nowhere in our government. They will say, I don't trust government. I'm skeptical about government. But if you bring up racism in the government, they become Mao Zedong and they will defend the government to the death. So I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, because I'm not a white person, but why don't a lot of white people on the right specifically want to actually come to the table and address these issues or even talk about them in a way that's honest?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that are intertwined. I think, first of all, they believe, a lot of white conservatives believe, that if you're truthful about America's sordid racial history, evil racial history, that in some way that's tearing down our country, or saying that our country is illegitimate, is not the great nation that they believe and that I believe that it is. So it's kind of like you can't question anything, and that's kind of like the Catholic Church was in the before the Enlightenment, that basically you could not question anything. I mean, you had Copernicus and Leonardo da Vinci and great thinkers, great scientists that were Christian, believed in God, believed in Jesus, but they really wanted to look deeper, and they were persecuted or had to operate in secret. Isaac Newton, was trying to decode the Bible. He wasn't trying to defame the Bible; he was trying to decode it. I don't know if what he came up with is accurate or not, but he was a pretty brilliant guy, one of the most brilliant people to ever walk this earth, and he had to do it in secret because of the blowback and the persecution that he would be subjected to from the Catholic Church. And that's a very dangerous mentality. And we cannot have that in this country. We need to be honest. I mean, just as we look at ourselves and say, look, I used to make a lot of mistakes. I've made some horrible mistakes, but that doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It doesn't mean I can't get better and I can't do great things in the future. And we have got to, I think it's unreasonable that we expect Germans to teach their kids about Nazism and Hitler and the evils of that. And we would like, it's not really happening now because Putin kind of celebrates it, but the Russians should know about the horrors, not only of Joseph Stalin, but also the czars before Stalin. It wasn't exactly a picnic before the communists took over. But I just say, to me, be honest and transparent. And the problem that you're bringing up, which I think is really important, is we have this horrible movement now in the U.S., mainly, entirely among conservatives, mainly white, but some black conservatives as well, that basically categorizes any serious, authentic discussion about the racial problems in our country today and their roots and how they are tied to conscious racist policies by the white power structure in the past. This stuff didn't happen by accident. That's critical race theory, or that's wokeism. Or believing, saying, what, we have a problem when the incarceration rate for Black Americans is 5 times white Americans, when the poverty rate is 3 times, when Black people on average, have only 10 cents of wealth for every dollar that white people have. These are facts, and to claim that, oh well, gee, they just need to work harder, or the implication always is there's something wrong with Black people. But somehow we have, you can look all over Twitter, social media, people like Ben Carson that served in Trump's administration. Somehow we have all these Black geniuses, incredibly accomplished people in business and medicine and law. But somehow they're all outliers. I guess they're the only ones who work hard. Well, maybe it's most of them, even though Ben Carson came from a very tough upbringing, but he still had a very involved mother, and he did have some nurturing, and he did have things that too many of our kids don't have today. They had most of them had some kind of foundation, some kind of construct. It might have been being able to go to a Catholic school. It might have been, a nurturing grandparent. Even Oprah Winfrey, who was horribly mistreated as a child and molested, and just had a horrific childhood in many ways. She still had an older relative. I don't know if it was an uncle or a grandparent, but she had people in her life that did look after her and did enable her to somehow traverse those horrible hurdles that she went through in childhood. That's what's necessary. And to say that we can enslave a people for hundreds of years, and then after the 13th Amendment was finally ratified, go another full century where we persecute, where we oppress, where we, marginalize, demonize, terrorize that group of people that had been enslaved. And we do that for 100 years after that, when they were supposedly given their freedom. And then all of the, a lot of stuff white folks did back in the, especially after World War II and up until the early 50s, when the Supreme Court vitiated a lot of the laws and government sanctioning of segregation and racism. A lot of this stuff was done on a sneak tip. A lot of this stuff was even when it was okay to use the N-word in public, and even when racism was more or less accepted, even then they tried to disguise a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, they did.
Even things like poll taxes. They could have said this is a tax just on black voters. It's interesting. Even then, as horrible as racial attitudes were, even then they weren't willing. Even then, that was a bridge too far. Why in our Constitution is the word slave never mentioned, even though they were clearly protecting slavery? Because our founding fathers, people like John Adams and Hamilton and others, Thomas Paine, the great propagandist for the Revolution, were virulently opposed to slavery. But even those that were in favor of it, still had to use euphemisms for it. So white people knew what they were doing, and they engineered the segregation of urban neighborhoods. This stuff did not happen by accident, and we have now cauldrons of privation and dysfunction in our inner cities. And you could put any group of people in that kind of situation and raise them in that situation, and I assure you, they probably wouldn't turn out as well as the low-income, predominantly black people that live there. They certainly wouldn't turn out any better. And
right.
That's something I just don't understand why we as a country can't be honest about that, and yes, teach our kids that so that they can be better. And I'll get to the heart of your question.
Sure.
Why white people not like talking about racism? Because they don't like the term or don't want to feel white guilt. The first thing when you start talking to a lot of white people about racial issues, the first thing they're going to do is tell you I'm not a racist. And they'll spend, if it's going to be a 30-minute conversation, they're going to spend 20 trying to convince you that they're not a racist. And again, I don't entirely blame them for that, because
I don't either.
a lot of white people, feel like that they are automatically considered racist by some people. But, so they hate this white guilt thing. And what I've said in another video, Jeff, is white people should not feel guilty about what previous generations that were members of the white power structure did, the horrible, right, evil crimes they committed for decades and centuries against black people. They shouldn't feel guilty for that.
Yeah, they didn't do it.
Doctors shouldn't feel guilty because previous doctors had horrible medical practices. But what we have to remember, as I mentioned earlier, white people still dominate every realm of our society. White people still control most of, not all, but most of the levers of power in our country. So it is not a matter of feeling guilty because we're white and it happened to be that other white people did these horrible things to black people. We should feel guilty because we have more juice, a little more power to fix these problems, the vestiges of our evil racial history. We have more power than in the aggregate than black people do to fix it. And so the only thing we should feel guilty about is not doing that, not doing everything we can to bring black Americans up to their full potential, or I really should say allow them to bring themselves up to their potential. But we, in this country, too many black people, low-income black people, millions of them are born not just with one hand tied behind their back, but two. So many disadvantages. It's truly stunning how well black people do in this country, how successful they are. because again, I cannot imagine any other people group with that history and with all of the vestiges of that, having to navigate that and overcome that. It's truly stunning how well Black people do, but it also tells you that not nearly as many Black people are succeeding as could be or should be.
Mhm.
And that should be a priority for white people. So again, white people don't want to be called racist. They don't want to feel guilty. They don't want our country impugned. They think if you talk about our racist truth, and our country was founded as a racist nation. We did something that had never been done in the world for white people. We did create a republic, a democratic republic, on a large scale. It had not happened since ancient Greece. Okay, and this was a far, even with all the restrictions on voting and everything, it was still a much more democratic system than even ancient Greece had.
Right.
And so no country had ever built what we built. It was a great thing for white people. Now you can say that I'm being facetious or I'm belittling that. I'm not.
No, that's factually what it was.
We just need to bring Black people into that 100%. And so that's why white people don't like to talk about it, and that's why every attempt to educate children about our racial reality in our country is considered critical race theory. If you tell the truth about our founding fathers, hey, they did some brilliant things, some visionary things, some probably divinely inspired things, but they also presided over some horrific things and allowed an evil to continue and to fester. And once they invented the cotton gin, to be put on steroids, which was slavery and racism, they were part of that too. And we've got to be able to talk about our leaders and our historical figures as human beings. That they do great things and they do awful
bad things. Yeah.
And the idea that we're going to sugarcoat that and minimize that is not a service to our country. The only way we get better, the only way we keep from making the same mistakes that we made in the past, is acknowledging the human frailty of the great men that started our country. Frederick Douglass, said that the men who started our country were great men. They were brave men. He didn't tear them out, and he sure as hell didn't like what was going on.
Yeah, he definitely didn't.
Was a brilliant man, but he made a point of saying, nevertheless, the founding fathers were great men, brave men, and did a great thing. The issue was, why the hell are you, imprisoning and enslaving Black people and excluding them?
Why are you not living up to the values that you outlined in the Declaration of Independence? Like, there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that. I mean, a lot of us,
I just don't get it. Companies do that. I mean, if you lose a political campaign, you don't sit there and go, "Boy, we did a wonderful job. It was a great campaign. Everything was done perfectly. We just lost the voters are stupid." I mean, some people do that, but guess what? They don't usually win the next race if they stay in politics. You say, maybe we had a great message, we had some great supporters, or we didn't, communicate this well, or we didn't organize effectively, or our media wasn't executed effectively, whatever. Companies do that all the time. How do you think Apple got where it is? How do you think Elon Musk got Tesla and SpaceX where they are? It was not by saying everything we do is great, we have no problems. I mean, you confront reality, and you can be a great country, you can be a great company, you can be a great organization, you can be a great person, and still have a lot of flaws. And what you attempt to do is minimize the flaws, overcome them, succeed, and do great things despite them. And that's how we ought to look at our country. Not be afraid. We can't talk about that because young children won't believe in America if we tell them the truth. Guess what? Kids love the truth. Young people really like authenticity. They don't like BS. Okay.
Yeah, they don't want to be lied to until they become adults. Then we want to be lied to.
Exactly. Well said. And so I think that's the way we need to be educating our kids. And this whole thing of wokeism, every time I see it, and I've seen Mike Pompeo, who probably run for president, Secretary of State under President Trump, tweet things about woke and wokeism. And by the way, he's a brilliant guy. And on foreign policy, I probably agree with him 80 or 90% of the time. I retweet him all the time in a positive way, things that he says. But he and other conservatives, mainly white conservatives, when they invoke the term woke or wokeism, I always retweet it and I put a comment, please define woke or please define wokeism. I have yet to get a response, not from anybody, because they can't define it. Basically, it means if you're racially conscious, if you acknowledge the racial realities of our country and that we need to do a hell of a lot better and make that a priority, that's woke. You know, if
Yeah.
you, yeah, there are people
I think
like,
I think you hit on something there. We don't have a real definition for woke on the left, and I've said this before because I attack what I perceive to be wokeism, but it's not what they say it is. And to me, it's almost like we use that word in the same way that progressives use the word racist. We just apply it to anything that we don't like. And
right,
when I talk about wokeness, I'm not talking about talking about American history or Black history or what have you. I mean, even critical race theory. I mean, I have more of a nuanced view on that. There's parts of it that I like, but there are ways that I don't like that it's been used in the classroom, because we're not talking about just teaching about what happened. I want more of that taught, honestly. But there's a difference between that and then sending the message that if you're white, that you're automatically an oppressor. And there have been stories where that's actually happened. I don't think that every teacher's doing it, but that is the message that's being sent. But there's a huge difference between that and then just talking about the wrong things that have happened in this country. And what you said about white guilt, I've observed too. So that's why I asked that question, because that's usually associated with white progressives, white guilt, but it's on both sides. It's just that people react to it differently depending on which team that they're on. On the right, they react more with anger and denial. On the left, they have this performative compassion that they have for us. Oh, I'm not racist. I love Black people. I donated $100 to Black Lives Matter, and that helped Black people, even though it didn't. It was a scam. But that
a great line of the organization, apparently.
Yeah, exactly. And so to me, no, it's true. I don't expect the left to ever have an honest dialogue on this because they benefit from it. I think one of the reasons why so many white people are afraid of having white guilt is because there are people who are paid big bucks to call them racist on the airwaves, on social media, and everywhere else. To me, I see that we have more of a chance on the right of being the adults in the room. But I think, and actually, I want to get your reaction to this. I think part of the problem is that we are so reactionary that we just basically form our opinions based on what the left is saying. So if the left says everybody's racist, we don't come and say, well, hold on, that's not true. Not everybody's racist. But you know what? We've got some issues here to work out. We've got issues in our justice system. We've got some disparities that we could use free market solutions to close those disparities, yada, yada, yada. They don't do that. They just say, oh no, racism isn't a thing. They go in the exact opposite direction, so that somebody like you who brings these issues up, you sound woke to them on the right, because they think that they have been almost conditioned by our media and media on both sides to think that most discussions about race are woke, and they're not. And now we're so tribal. You brought that up earlier, that anything that doesn't go with what our team's leaders say is automatically wrong. And where do we have a point to where we can actually have conversations about these things? I mean, we talked about Twitter earlier. Hopefully this can facilitate more of that, but because I know you get it from the right too. How do you break through? Like, how do you break through that knee-jerk thinking about these issues?
Well, believe it or not, you simply speak truth to people. You show that you respect them, that you have, while you obviously can't fully empathize with anybody except maybe yourself, you do have some appreciation for what they're dealing with or what they're concerned about. And you start there. You build the lattice work, so to speak, from there, as opposed to launching in with basically, hey, white people are racist, or hey, racism is grossly exaggerated. It's something the left is using to tear down America. Well, you start a discussion like that, and the people that already agree with you, they're going to go rah rah, but you're not going to persuade anybody that doesn't agree with you. One of my favorite quotes from Abraham Lincoln was, "A feeling widely held, whether well or ill-founded, is not safely discarded." And that's why he was so successful, that he truly understood that just because the masses of people or large numbers of people may hold a view that you think is deplorable, if you're going to make change in a democratic society, you need, if not all those people, you need at least some of them to come over. And you don't get that by insulting them or acting like what they think is crazy or racist or evil. You just talk to them in terms that they can understand, in terms that they care about, and connect it to that. I mean, for instance, when we talk about our racial issues, uh, when you just remind people, and frankly, too many white people, I think, are not even fully mindful of this, that we have, millions of Black kids in poverty in this country that are, in very dangerous neighborhoods, just because, and this is partly a vestige of welfare policies that we had, and keeping the breadwinner out of a home in order for people to qualify for welfare. So we literally, in this country, first with slavery and then with so-called welfare that supposedly help Black people, we consciously broke up families. I mean, we had a several hundred-year assault on a Black family from the white power structure. Okay, it started with slavery and it ended with welfare laws that said, hey, if somebody's working in the house, you don't get any more welfare. Boy, that makes a lot of sense. How about calibrating it and, rewarding people for working, but maybe not earning enough? So, that's when you tell people that it is those kids that are raised in those conditions that are vestiges of our evil racial history, they're growing up with our kids. Okay, they're not going anywhere. And the question is, do we want them adding wealth and strength to our society, or do we want those kids to grow up in the criminal, relegated to the criminal justice system, having to, take social welfare program money or housing assistance or, food assistance? I mean, what do we want as a country? Do we want to think of this country as, and I don't mean a militarized country, but just as a figure of speech, I'll say we're an army. I mean, we're taking on the Chinese Communist Party in China. We have to win. We cannot let their idea win in this world, which is controlling people, which is authoritarian, which is brutal, genocidal at times. We cannot say, well, just because China is a big economy and they've got all those people, we're just going to throw in the towel. We've got to win, not just keep going. We've got to win. Our ideas have to win. And that means we cannot afford to lose anybody. Right. And all these kids that are brought up with enormous disadvantages, where it's much harder to achieve your potential when you have that background, it needs to be a national priority to fix that. But when I talk in terms like that, even to white conservatives, a lot of them, a light bulb goes on, and a very few will say, "Oh no, leave those kids to themselves." Maybe some of them think that. I've never had anybody tell me that. We have a thought process in this country, though obviously nobody says it out loud, but the practical effect of it is that we're going to punish low-income kids for whatever problems their parents have. If their parents have gotten addicted to drugs, if they've gotten into crime, which we can talk about that forever too, why that happens and how that ought to be dealt with, and how our prison system is atrocious. But putting that aside, okay, that means their kids don't get a good education. That means their kids live in neighborhoods teeming with drug dealers and gang members, in unsafe conditions with horrible influences. That's how we're going to pay back those drug users and criminals. We're gonna get their children. Boy, that makes a hell of a lot of sense, right?
That'll show them.
I mean, that's not American. That's not conservative. We need to mobilize our entire country. We have large swaths of people that are nowhere near performing what they could be if they simply had a better infrastructure, better influences, better public policy. And so I'm going on a long diatribe there, but it's that basic way of thinking that I found that a lot of white conservatives will listen to. And you start with where people agree. They say in sales, always get the prospect to start saying yes. I mean, do you love your family? Do you love a safe car? Yes. Well, then you connect those yeses to what you're trying to sell. Well, that's the same in political and policy dialogue. Start with where people agree, and then show that what we're talking about Black American advancement and about, yes, being more mindful of our racial disparities actually is necessary to fully mobilize this country to win against China, to keep the American idea alive and strong, to not give our enemies and not give those we disagree with ammunition. You talk about the left. Well, who gives the left the ammunition? I mean, the left, the right, and the clueless white conservatives, and I say clueless not like they're stupid. Clueless does not mean stupid. It means
You don't
not
know what you don't
mindful,
know.
not, taking in the information and processing information that you could if you wanted to. We have a lot of clueless white conservatives that keep giving, and politicians, and especially pundits like Tucker Carlson, that give these people ammunition because they stoke their fear. They stoke the fears of conservative white people. They feed them misinformation, and that just creates more divisions in our country. And of course, if you're black, or if you're someone or Hispanic, or sympathetic to the aims of people in those groups, of course you're going to be alarmed by that. Of course you're going to feel under siege. So it really comes down to, Jeff, simply respecting people, whatever their point of view, talking to them as best you can in a rational manner, connecting what most of us agree on to some of the things maybe that people are hesitant to talk about, or afraid to talk about, and say, you know what, you may not want to talk about racism. Maybe you're afraid you're going to be called a racist, but here's why we have to deal with that anyway. We've got millions of black kids way below potential. We have millions of Hispanic kids way below potential in our country. That's not good for the country. That's not how you build a stronger country. And I said in a video once, I said our enemies could not deploy a more effective weapon against our country than our racial situation. I mean, look at it. Look how it destabilizes us. Look at how much that contributes to the fissures in our society, to the venom in our political dialogue. Look how much it gives power to people that that are on the right side of the political equation don't agree with. It gives them ammunition. What are white conservatives really doing to address these issues? When you're not doing anything, and when it's almost a complete vacuum on one side, that gives a hell of a lot of territory and a kind of free reign to people that maybe you wouldn't agree with their solutions on. At least they're saying something about it. At least they're talking.
Yeah, at least they whether they're sincere or not, at least they're trying to put forth some solutions. And
Right.
and when it comes, I mean, who runs these areas where black people are doing the worst? It's Democrats. And I have my tinfoil hat on this. I think a lot of it is by design, but I mean, and this might make some people uncomfortable. There are Democratic politicians who actually care and actually think that they're actually helping. And in some ways they are. But here's the thing. All I see on the right, you'll probably actually know where I'm going with this. What reports do you see from conservative outlets every Monday morning? 1 million people shot in Lori Lightfoot, Chicago. Okay, you're highlighting an issue. I get it. I don't want to see that either. But are you going to do anything more than use it as a political talking point? Or are you going to use that to say, hey, why aren't Republicans trying to solve these problems? Like we talk about crime all the time. I mean, Republicans are running against Democrats on crime, but are we really going to do anything about it? Well, no, we can't, because they'll always tell me, oh, well, we don't run those cities. Exactly. So why don't we run those cities? Oh, yeah, it's because y'all ain't trying, or your leaders aren't trying. You may, like the average Republican voter person, Joe Sixpack, when I talk to them about this stuff one-on-one, they get it, but they're not the ones in power. So why are we complaining about Chicago when you know that you're not going to push the party to do something about it? So to me, and I think I am seeing positive signs. I think some people are starting to finally get it. I mean, we've got a record number of Black politicians running under the GOP banner, some in Black areas, others in other areas, but that definitely is a step in the right direction. But what do you think Republicans should be doing to start making inroads in these communities? Because I think we're starting to see more of a will to make that happen than there has been in the past.
Well, again, it's rationality and admitting that there's a problem. A friend that I know, a guy who's was a very successful television executive. We were talking about some of these racial issues. He happens to be a white guy, and he said, I was telling a friend that we operate in this country as if we just want all of those poor Black people to kill each other. just fence it in and let them get rid of it. And believe me, he and I are pretty simpatico. So he certainly didn't mean that in any kind of positive way. He was alarmed by it and thinks it's a terrible kind of a subconscious way of thinking. And it's completely contrary to what we want and what is necessary for us to have a great country. But it really comes down to, Jeff, is being willing to listen to people that have a different viewpoint, that are dealing with these issues every day. If you're a white person, certainly if you're, let's say you're a business leader, or you're in some way involved in politics, maybe you're a Republican, maybe your district is overwhelmingly Republican, but you know what? Go talk to the people that are members of the Congressional Black Caucus. Go out and hang out and get to know more Black people and listen to what they actually have to say and how they live and what their insights are. You'd be amazed what you learn by doing that. And then that gives you the knowledge base. And by the way, while you're at it, talk to police officers, see what they're dealing with, what they're seeing, whether they're white officers or Black officers. Learn more about what they're encountering. I have a friend who's a police chief, and he was a leader, a national leader in the whole issue of de-escalation and trying to keep shootings from happening involving police before they happen, and the tactics and strategies to do that successfully. And he's a very law and order guy, but he has seen and been victimized by obvious racism and at best racial insensitivity, in some cases out and out racism. And that guy was a beat cop for years and a very successful police chief. So he sees both sides of it. He's seen the worst of the worst. He's seen the criminality and the horrors of that, but he's also seen the role that race still plays, a negative effect that it still has in our country. So the point is, you've got to get people talking. And again, what can we agree on? We want less crime. Okay, let's start with, and let's look at some data. What actually has caused there to be less crime? No political agenda. Let's just see. Well, it does take, New York City, even though they've had a spike in crime, it still is one of the lowest crime rate cities in the country. Right. Now, guess what? They happen to have a massive number of cops. They have 2 or 3 times as many cops per person as like Dallas, LA, almost any other city. There are almost no cities with as many police officers on a relative to population as New York City. Well, now you can say that's coincidence. You can say it's the unions, make it hard to fire police officers. So I'm not saying it's all positive. Sure. But you can't ignore that data point. That's kind of a big thing to ignore when you have 2 or 3 times as many police, and even with a spike in crime, a much lower murder rate, crime rate than you have in most other major cities. You can say that's a coincidence, or you can say, maybe we need more cops, per population. And then on the other side,
which is what a lot of Black people want, by the way.
Absolutely. But then see that getting to what you're saying, Jeff, they want more police, but they don't want brutality. They don't want insensitivity. Exactly. They don't, and this idea of community policing and having police infused into these low income or areas that where they have a crime problem, being part of the community and not just showing up when somebody's been shot, right? Not just showing up when you want to ask questions about a robbery or a shooting and nobody's seen you before. Where has he been or where has she been? But actually playing an active role in the community. Some conservatives act like, that's just a waste of time. They should be out there pounding, these thugs, and they should be out there being tough. Well, that's not how it works. Yeah. There are times you have to be tough and you have to be brutal, and police actually have to shoot to kill. No doubt about it. But how about doing stuff that makes that happen a lot less often? How about doing things that will make poor Black kids that are raised in some of these really problematic neighborhoods grow up to think, those cops are pretty cool. They respect me. They actually, they care about what's going on with me. They're not all bad. I mean, they might be rough on somebody that I know or whatever, but they do care. They're pretty cool. How about being raised with that mentality versus these people just storming in after a shooting and not seeming mindful at all of the circumstances these people are living in? Stop and frisk. Now, some people would say that's why New York had an implosion in its crime rate in the late '90s. Uh, I can tell you, there's no evidence it was stop and frisk. Stop
No,
and
there's
frisk
not.
is an example of a horrible idea.
Yep.
And whether I don't care what color you are, what political party, who can support the idea of any government? I mean, I love the police, but let's face it, they're part of the government. That
They're government officials.
Who would ever say it was okay for the police to stop someone because they look like a Trump supporter, or they might be a white nationalist? So if they're walking around a Trump rally, they can just stop them and frisk them. Who would think that was okay? But that's what we were doing in New York City and other cities. Just because a black teenager was walking around, he could just summarily be stopped. That's unconstitutional.
And the vast majority of the time, that was the case. The vast majority of the time that they stopped and frisked, they didn't find anything.
Exactly. And that's the very thing our founding fathers never wanted to happen in this country. And beyond the fact that it's unconstitutional, it's un-American, what does that do if you're a black person and a policeman just stops you like that, and you're in their family, or you're their child or their brother or their friend? What does that make you think about the police? Okay. If you're going to overcome, you talked about what is it going to take to overcome this crime. Communities are going to have to overcome it, working with the police.
Right.
And doing that sort of thing, doing things that breed mistrust among the police, or make it look like the police aren't really mindful of and caring about the people that they're supposed to be protecting. That's no way to engage the community. That's no way to create a partnership that's going to fight crime. And I've one of the things I've done in the political world is political canvassing, where you knock on doors for candidates. And I've talked to, and I've been in a lot of neighborhoods with a large black population, and it's really something. I've had some of them say, man, this is a rough neighborhood, but I'm not putting up with it. We've gotten together and we put up surveillance cameras and lay out a whole plan of what they've done. And this is without any police help. So there are plenty of people in these neighborhoods that are eager to make things better, eager to do their part. But you need a partnership. You need people to see that there is hope, that actual progress can be made. And so things like community policing, making the police seem like and actually be an active participant in the communities, again, not just swooping in after a shooting or a robbery or a domestic violence issue or a drug bust. That's essential. That will help activate the community. That will help mobilize the community, inspire the community. And that's how you start to build and you create an anti-crime culture. That's where people start to think this isn't okay anymore. It's kind of like what happened with white people and racism. We passed laws against racism and segregation, but it took people basically to getting the feeling through peer pressure and yes, the media and all that. Hey, it's not okay to use the N-word. Hey,
exactly.
Now we have a lot of disguised racism now. Believe me, I'm not saying racism's over, but it would be foolish to say it is a much less blatant than it was 50 years ago. But eventually people looked around and said, that's not okay. Well, that's how it has to be in fighting crime, because it seems, it's not okay to be a criminal. It's not okay to be in a gang. It's not just the police that are going to come in, but people in this community are not going to put up with it. And they're not going to be afraid because they're working with the police, and the police have their back. And they're not just looking at them with a side eye like they're kind of part of the problem, but like they're part of the solution. So it really is a change in mindset among law enforcement, mainly the leaders in law enforcement. It's recruiting and training of police officers, which requires more funding, not less. Why would you if you don't think the police are doing a good job, why would you defund them where they have even fewer resources to do a good job or to get better? Obviously, you have to allocate it properly. Maybe they don't need a military assault vehicle. Maybe you put that money in.
Maybe they don't need a tank.
They may need that too, but maybe what they need isn't the latest set of weapons, or maybe put more money into training, maybe recruit a higher caliber group of people to be officers, men and women to be officers, have a higher standard. Because obviously, if you bring people in with the wrong temperament, it's very hard to train that out of them. I mean, our military does a pretty good job, but people wash out. Not everybody makes it in the military, but they do take people that are problematic and manage to train them to be effective. But it's a hell of a lot better if you start with people that are stable and pretty much have a good mindset, not people that are hardened in a negative direction and try to make them good police officers. So recruiting is essential, training is essential, working with the community is essential, and having enough cops is essential. Because again, New York City has a ton of cops, and they, for their size, much less crime than I think any major city in the United States on a per population basis.
Yeah. So last question. I mean, when we're looking at the polls, even from earlier this year, I mean, it's pretty apparent that we're going to see an increase in support among Black voters, Latino voters for the Republican Party. It's still going to go mostly to Democrats, but there is going to be an increase. That's already been indicated. I think that this is more a result of Democrats pushing these people away than it is of the efforts of the Republican Party. I mean, there's a lot of good people in the Republican Party who are trying to reach non-white voters, but I do think that most of this is because Democrats have lost their damn minds. What do you think that folks like us need to do to transform the Republican Party into something that would seem like more of an alternative that Black and Latino voters are willing to consider? What can we do on the right to change minds among conservatives to get them to see a better way of approaching this?
Well, I tell you what, Republicans need to work one hell of a lot harder to connect with Black voters, not just give it lip service. Now, the party under Ronna McDaniel, they've spent millions of dollars. They put, kind of political centers or points of presence in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, and they've achieved some traction with that. They've done a great job of candidate recruiting. I don't know how much of it is the party or it's just candidates gravitating and saying, hey, I'm willing to Republican. But we may well have 5 more Black members of Congress, Black House members this year. We'll probably got at least 2 and probably 5. Now, there are many more Black Democrats that are members of the House, but nevertheless, adding 5 would be very significant. We could possibly, if Herschel Walker wins in Georgia, have 2 Black Republican senators and only 1 Black Democratic senator, which would certainly be a turnaround from how things have been for the previous few decades. So, it really is a matter of just simply making it a priority. I think white leaders, especially those that call themselves conservatives, have got to step up and say, this insanity has got to end. We've got to quit calling, education about racial reality in our country and how we got where we are and why we still have a lot of these problems. We've got to quit calling that critical race theory. We've got to quit saying that being sensitive and mindful. I don't believe in being colorblind. I believe in being color mindful, which is not condescending. It's not patronizing, but it's like, if you see a Black person, that they've dealt with, and certainly their parents and grandparents dealt with things that, you would consider horrific and unacceptable. And they are dealing with things that are different, and they are disadvantaged for the most part, or all too often, because of the kind of horrible construct that we created for especially lower income Black people in this country, and we still haven't fixed it. So being mindful of that and is it's not reverse racism, it's not wokeism, it's simply like anybody that because of their background or their situation faces different challenges or has maybe a different experience than you do. You're mindful of that. That what's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. The idea that we need a lot more diversity in this country, meaning a lot, and that's almost become a euphemism, but yeah, we need a hell of a lot more Black people in powerful positions in this country, especially in the economic realm. I said in a video that the NFL has a partial antitrust exemption. That's how they can negotiate these big streaming contracts and media contracts for the entire. All the teams can be negotiated by a team at the NFL. That's not allowed in other businesses. So they have a very lucrative antitrust exemption. I've said if the teams don't find a way to get at least 3 teams owned and outright, not just silent partners or own a little stake, but actual control, have a controlling interest, members of minority groups, at least 3 or 4 teams in the next 5 to 7 years, they should lose that antitrust exemption. Now, some people say, "Oh my God, that's socialism." No, it isn't. I mean, talk about socialism. Have you checked out any of the stadiums lately? Any of these Taj Mahals? Yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah.
a few of them are privately financed, but not very many. A lot of taxpayer money, government money, that horrible government paid for these.
It sure does.
Where we play NFL football. As I said, they have exemptions. They have antitrust exemptions no other industry in America has, except baseball. This has an even bigger antitrust exemption. And that, by the way, the same should apply to MLB as well. So they're getting, government is giving the NFL special dispensation, rights that you and I would not have if we started any other kind of business. Okay. And if we wanted to build, if our company or company we work for wanted to build a big facility, they might get some tax abatements here and there, but they're not going to get, in most cases, anything nearly as generous as these revenue and these funding packages that come in from governmental authorities for these NFL stadiums. So you can't say on the one hand, it's socialism and it's the government micromanaging, but on the other hand, oh yeah, but go ahead, let the taxpayer build a grand stadium that'll basically be controlled and owned lock, stock, and barrel by one man or one family. Oh yeah, go ahead. Let's suspend the antitrust laws, for NFL. That's purely a government. That's not socialism. That's let me think what that is. That's it's pro footballism. That's it. It's pro football.
Pro footballism. Yeah.
So let's be even handed. And so things like, hey, you know what? We can do a hell of a lot better. We can have a whole hell of a lot more Black and Hispanic, and for that matter, women, but certainly Black and Hispanic on when you're talking about racial and ethnic side, in positions of influence in this country. And we need to be working a hell of a lot harder as a country to do that. And it needs to be led by, or is certainly heavily championed by, white people that have influence. And we have got to have some people with the guts to go out there that are white conservatives and not say I'm a moderate, or the term moderate kind of turns my stomach, because I'm fervent, as you can hear. I'm pretty fervent. I'm not moderate, but that doesn't take ideas that have been labeled left or labeled right and find ways to integrate them, or see some merit or ways to take pieces of all of those to come up with rational policy. That doesn't make me a moderate. I hope it makes me a rational person, and again, a pro-American person or pro-Americans person. So it really is going to come down to talking, but talking seriously and backing it with action. And I've laid out very specific plans of things that we could do as a country that would do a lot, I think, to overcome this horrible disadvantage of poverty that disproportionately Black kids have to endure. A lot of Hispanic kids too, certainly disproportionately Hispanic too. Both of those groups, we need to come up with ways, and there are ways, proven ways, to put these kids in a much better situation. And we need to make that a priority, not just say, well, we'll give it lip service, or we'll let the Democrats talk about that. That's no way to solve that problem, no way to make this a great country and keep it a great country. So it is going to take that. It is going to be that. And, the bottom line from a partisan point of view, Jeff, is most Black people don't trust the Republican Party.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter how wonderful the Republican ideas are, or what wonderful speeches that they give or policies that they promulgate are. They're simply not trusted. And why is that? Because let's face it, the Republican Party, once Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, but it started with the really turning point was the Civil Rights Act in '64. The Republican Party, or certainly the movers and shakers, a lot of key people in it, made a strategic decision to try to enlist the segregationist, or at the very least, anti-civil rights Democratic voters in the South. And they recast the party. It took them, arguably it took them, 10 or 15 years to accomplish it. But the first big victory, so to speak, was Richard Nixon being elected in 1968 and carrying, southern states and doing it, even with George Wallace in the race. So that was a strategic decision the Republican Party made. And when people say, well, the Democratic Party is the party of the Klan and the party of Jim Crow, well, that's true.
Yeah.
But guess what? They did abandon that. I mean, look, we may hate the policies that they have that affect or are meant to target Black people or Hispanic. We may think they're terrible policies. We may think that they have their own version of racism, which I think they do,
Yeah.
many of them, unfortunately. But
it's a silly talking point, though. I mean, like whenever I hear that, I'm like, okay, every single Democrat who supported the KKK is pretty much dead now. So
exactly. Robert Byrd.
Like, I mean,
yeah. It's just it's a ridiculous thing to do. Look, if a Democratic politician does or says something racist, by God, they should be called out. But I mean, it's just ridiculous to say they're the party of the Klan. They turned away from that. Now, again, I'm not saying that everything that they did in turning away from that was great policy or great for the country. But the upshot is they did turn away from that, and the Republicans turned toward it. Not all Republicans, but a significant subset, significant elements of leadership in the Republican Party, with a wink and a nod, were hell bent on getting all of those disaffected, formerly Democratic white voters in the South to start voting Republican. And by God, they pretty well pulled it off.
They did.
And so that's just, and not that every Black person thinks about that per se, but that's played into this whole thing. You know, Donald Trump as president, he with his opportunity zones and the tax program that he passed, which had been talked about for 40 years since Reagan, had never been done, where they target investment into distressed areas and inner cities. He actually got that done. That's brought tens of billions, maybe even hundreds of billions, into distressed communities, disproportionately minority populated. That was great policy. You know, he provided ongoing, enduring funding for HBCUs, which had never been done before. That was great policy. He put a lot more into sickle cell anemia research and other research that disproportionately affects Black people. So, you know, Trump had some good policies, but let's face it, Donald Trump is afraid to piss off the racist members of his base. He's afraid to call them out. And that's why he lost the election, because in that debate,
that's exactly what I was just thinking about.
When he was asked, "What are you going to say to these various hate groups and these paramilitary groups or whatever, these white supremacist groups? What are you going to say to them? What do you have to say to them?" And he said something like, "Stand by and stand down," or something.
Yeah, stand down and stand by. And he said that after waffling about it.
I want to tell you, and since this is not a children's program, I'm going to tell you literally what I would have advised Trump to say if he had that. And he knew he was going to get that question. It wasn't a big secret. I mean, he knew he was one way or the other going to be hit with that. You know what Donald Trump should have said? He should have said, "I hate fucking white supremacists."
Yeah.
That's all he should have said.
It's not hard. Like
the F word. I hate fucking white supremacists, and no more. Do you know? Of course, people say, "I can't believe Trump used it," but they would have to use it, and even if they bleeped it, everybody would know. That would have sent a shockwave, because it would have pissed off some members of his base. Not a huge percentage,
but an insignificant number of people would have been angry at that.
It would have sent a very powerful, but that he could not even do that. Donald Trump, his biggest problem, the reason he lost, he's afraid of his own base. He is afraid to speak truth to them. He stokes what they already believe, but he does not challenge them. And a lot of them actually would listen to him. They if he put it the right way, just like, and he does not have the courage to try and do that. And that's why he lost the election.
When he put forward the platinum plan, I noticed how people reacted. Who didn't like it? The conservative Inc. They didn't like it. The base loved it.
Well, and you know what? Some of the base, just like the Democrats, were willing to turn away from those that believed in segregation in the South. In the mid 1960s, the Republicans are going to have to turn away completely, unequivocally, dramatically, vociferously against anybody that espouses racism or even gives it a wink and a nod or gives it a different label. Wokeism and woke is becoming the new N word. It's a code word, and it basically means don't talk about anything that involves recognizing the challenges that Black people face and why they face those challenges because of our history. But it's it's become a way to defame people, to it's a form of cancel culture. Conservatives say we hate cancel culture, we hate Twitter deplatforming people, which we discussed earlier. Hopefully Elon Musk will do a lot less of that deplatforming and allow a more open dialogue. But so conservatives are always the ones saying they hate cancel culture. This whole anti-woke movement is cancel culture on steroids. They're trying to shut down what kids are taught in school. They're trying to water down our horrific racial history in this country as if that's a service to our kids, as if you can't believe we're a great country and still say, but we did some god awful evil things and we should never allow that to happen. That is the worst kind of cancel culture, when you're basically brainwashing kids into thinking that our founding fathers were 100% virtuous and that everything done at the beginning of the country was great.
It's just another type of indoctrination.
We got over it. I'm sorry, that's not proper education. And the idea that, again, whether you're a company, whether you're a country, that you can't look at the worst things you've done, the biggest mistakes you've made, and say, you know what, we're still a hell of a good company. But we did some horrible stuff, but we're not gonna make that mistake again, and we're gonna build from it. That's what that's what a person has to do. I mean, that's a great example, is to say, we made horrible mistakes as a country, but thank God we did a lot of good things, and we eventually at least started the process and made progress in overcoming the horrific racial policies that we had. We're still not there, but at least we turned it around, and it did. I'll tell you one thing people don't point out enough. We didn't have like a Palestinian terrorism in this country. We didn't have the IRA like they had in Northern Ireland. We didn't have, we had the Black Panthers but we never had a large scale terrorist or movements among Black people. And there were slave uprisings, but we overcame slavery in this country through constitutional process. It was not a military coup. It was not a revolution like they had in France and had many of in Mexico in the early 20th century. It was a constitutional process. It was the one laid out by our founding fathers, which is we had constitutional amendments, the Reconstruction Amendments, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that ended slavery and supposedly gave Black people equal treatment under the law. It took nearly 100 years for that to be upheld by the Supreme Court and start to be enforced. But nevertheless, we at least ended slavery, and at least we began the process of treating Black people like every other American. But it was through a constitutional process. That's a great story about our country, that we were able to do that. So even when you talk about the bad things in the United States, you can say that some good came out of it, or we learned some things, or
we overcame
mistakes make it, we don't want to make again. And so I really, and again, I don't agree with everything taught in critical race theory, as is illegal. It's a legal analysis. It's a way of looking at our laws and our criminal justice system, and how our racial history has caused them to disproportionately and negatively affect Black people. That's what true critical race theory is. Critical race theory is not, talking about Black people, talking about the issues that disproportionately and negatively affect Black people. That's not really critical race theory. But this whole idea that if you show any sensitivity, any legitimate concern about where Black Americans are in this country, what needs to be done about that, the reality behind that's woke, or that's critical race theory, is, as I said, that is cancel culture on steroids. It's not good for our kids. It's not good for our country. And we need to be talking about that and be honest about that. And it does not mean every white person is an oppressor. And, as with anything, there are exaggerations and malevolent, use of any term or any idea. But the idea that, let's face it, most white people are not terribly aware or mindful of what Black people have dealt with and are still dealing with. It's not that they're evil. It's not that they're bad. It's just that,
you don't know what you don't know.
And that's the problem another problem with this whole CRT and wokeism thing is it kind of makes it okay to say we're not going to talk about racism. It makes it okay to say we're not going to get serious about these horrible problems in our inner cities and millions of Black and Hispanic kids that are raised in poverty and subjected to often atrocious educational systems and don't get, if they don't have parents that can be at home with them, or they have a mom that's working 2 jobs and they have to be latchkey kids because they can't afford childcare, they're not getting the good adult examples that they need on a daily basis after school. We can do stuff about that. But again, if you're always talking about, I don't want to be woke, I don't like wokeism, I don't want critical race theory. If that's the constant refrain, it's kind of a way of saying, well, great, we don't have to talk about this stuff because that would be woke. See, so it's terrible for our country, and I will speak out against it every time that I get the chance. And I think if you frame it the right way and put it in the right context, a lot of white people, even white people that don't like it, some of maybe what's being taught, will be amenable to it and receptive, and we can work together to come up with better curricula for our kids, authentic, raw, real, but still patriotic. All those can coexist if thinking people and people who care work together and make it a priority. And that's true of all these issues involving race and in this country, in my opinion. If it's just talking, being rational and actually caring and having the right intent, and it doesn't mean we're going to be perfect, but we can do one hell of a lot better. And that's the way to start that.
Amen. Amen. And I think that's a good place to leave it off. Well, we have to do this again because there's a lot more that I'm going to want to talk to you about. But until then, why don't you, before we sign off, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you?
Well, probably the easiest kind of portal for me is on Twitter, and that's at Spieckerman, and it's not spelled like a loudspeaker, even though I do speak loudly often. It's spelled Spieckerman, I before E except after C, and it's a long E sound. Spieckerman, at Spieckerman. You'll find me on Twitter. There are links to my YouTube channel, a little more about my background, and for what it's worth, for better or worse, you'll kind of get my take on what's going on in the news and public policy. I try not to do hot takes. I try to, even when I'm timely, I really do try to be, contemplative and deliberative and think a little bit and not just blast something out unless it's something that I've already, done some work on and formed an opinion on. So I'd love to have more of your listeners follow. I'd love to have a dialogue with them and get their thoughts on what we discussed today and any of the other issues that we're dealing with as a country. So at Spieckerman is probably the easiest, but there's a Spieckerman Media YouTube channel, and I'm Spieckerman on Facebook and IG. So you can find me on those platforms as well. And again, for better, for worse, see some of my videos and some of the evangelizing on some of these issues that I've been trying to do.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks for joining the program.
It was a joy, Jeff. Thanks for enduring my long rants and for your thoughtful questions and all that you're doing to try to improve the dialogue and get people to rethink a lot of things that are very important.
Awesome. Thank you.